I'm Sir Kyle. Today we're going to be launching an initiative to bring you valuable, evidence-based research and anecdotal evidence regarding training, supplementation, and nutrition. As part of Accent Sledge's commitment to education, I'm here to help guide you all and provide you with insight to optimize your fitness journey. Today we'll be diving into questions asked by you guys, and our goal is to simply allow you to be able to apply them to your own training and nutrition. So let's get right into it with our first question of the day. Are there any tips to fight exhaustion during an extreme bulking cycle? So when pushing calories, one of the most important things to consider is one's fatigue management. So to help you understand, let's break this down into key strategies. First, focus on meal timing and composition. Spreading your meals evenly throughout the day will help sustain good energy levels and prevent any types of dips or spikes with one's glucose. Now, because I don't have specific information regarding this person's diet, the reason I start with ensuring blood levels are relatively stable is because that is often where most people go wrong. This is where insulin sensitivity is key. Now, the term is often used very loosely and sometimes in a misinformed way, so we can touch on that later if you guys wish. But in maintaining good insulin sensitivity, two lab markers we'll always want to pay attention to are A1C and fasted insulin. Now, maybe given this person's question, let's say that their A1C levels are starting to trend upward north of 5.2, and we're noticing historically that their fasted insulin levels are now out of an ideal range of 2 to 5. We can presume their sensitivity is starting to become poor, therefore they're not going to be processing and utilizing carbohydrates as efficiently or optimally as intended. Lastly, don't neglect your cardiovascular health. Low intensity, steady state, light cardio is very helpful for recovery and managing fatigue. Think of it as building your work capacity more so than burning calories. The bulk is about building quality tissue, which indeed takes time. So don't eat everything in sight and pay attention to your recovery capabilities. Kyle, what is the best way to stimulate stubborn muscle groups? So this question was asked in various ways, so I kind of grouped it together to just be defined as muscle groups. Now, regardless of the muscle group, whether it be your chest, back, legs, or the ever so famous arms, the answer applies to them all. When it comes to stubborn muscle groups, the solution often lies in the execution rather than the exercise selection. Let me break this down into actionable strategies. The first strategy is to slow down your movements. Most people rush through most of their reps, and in doing so, not only does this reduce time under tension, but sometimes the activation of the muscle. I recommend using a controlled tempo throughout, especially on the lowering or the eccentric portion of the rep. My second strategy that I often deploy with clients is I ask them to film their movements. Now, in doing so, this isn't necessarily for the gram or TikTok. It's more so I can try to find out where I can critique them. How can I make the movement better? Not only can we check the tempo during these videos, but we can see the execution from the first rep to the last. When looking back at videos that I personally film myself, not only do we typically move at a quicker rate, but reality tells a different version of the story. Another key technique I often suggest clients to use is pausing at the end ranges. So when doing a rep, pausing slightly almost at the lockout position, and then pausing at the bottom right before initiating into the concentric portion of the movement. In doing so, not only can you maximize tension on the muscle, but you're also ensuring that you're activating said muscle before entering the next phase of the rep. Another important factor is establishing the mind-muscle connection. Now, this is something that everyone over time will develop. Some people quicker than others, some movement patterns easier than others. But the reality is, the better mind-muscle connection you have, the easier it's going to be to build muscle with that body part. In closing, remember, stimulating stubborn muscle groups isn't about fancy exercises or techniques. It's about mastering the basics with seamless execution. Blending food in a bulk to get in calories. What are my thoughts? Quite frankly, let me be direct about my thoughts here. I fucking hate it. Here's why. First off, chewing your food serves an important process in digestion and satiety signaling. When you blend everything, you're bypassing these natural mechanisms that help your body process nutrients efficiently. Second, if you're having to liquefy your foods, we need to look at why that's the case. Why is that the only way to get calories in? Are we pushing food too aggressively? Are the foods we're choosing not the right foods for you? Oftentimes, this is a sign that we need to adjust the approach rather than continue force feeding. Additionally, proper digestion starts with chewing. Blending everything might seem like an easy solution, but it can actually lead to digestive issues down the road. I prefer focusing on nutrient-dense, calorie-rich whole foods to get the job done. This approach might take more effort, but it's more sustainable and better for your overall health and well-being. Remember, building quality muscle takes time. If you're struggling to eat your food, that's usually a sign to reassess your approach, not break out the blender.
Kyle, do you still punch drywalls and drink Monster? I can't say that I ever punched a drywall. Maybe you have me confused with another Kyle. But seriously, I don't know what the fuck kind of question this is. I don't recall ever punching a drywall. So if somehow in a dream I punched a drywall, at least it was a wall, not you. Kyle, I work nights. Is it better to work out after work or before work once I wake up? This is a fantastic question about night shift training, and honestly, the answer isn't a one-size-fits-all. Let me break down how to find what works best for you. First, assess your energy patterns throughout the day. Are you typically someone that is drained after working all night long? If so, the best answer is probably going to be training first thing in the morning after proper nutrition, of course. That way you can maximize your potential and output in the gym. Second, consider your sleep quality. If you're training late at night and noticing that it's impacting your sleep, training at that time is probably not going to be the best bet. Now, for long-term night shifts, assuming that the person asking this isn't on a temporary schedule, your body will adapt to a new circadian rhythm. The key, like many things in life, is consistency. Pick a training time that you can stick to regularly and allow your body the time to adjust. Where would you start mapping digestive issues in the off season? So let's talk about mapping digestive issues in the off season. This is actually a systematic approach and process that I take all of my clients through. First, we need to identify if there are any GI related symptoms that the client is experiencing. These are things such as bloating or digestion, irregular bowel pattern or movements, acid reflux, post-meal discomfort, gas or excessive burping, or any food sensitivities. From there, I look at specific lab markers. Gastrin, for example, is going to give me some insight into the production of stomach acid. We might also look for lab markers that point to any type of inflammation or things that might affect nutrient absorption. Next, we evaluate meal structure and support. Sometimes it's not just what you're eating, but how you're eating it. In the off season, when food volume is higher than usual, it's expected that our bodies are going to need additional support to help process these larger meals. Next, in the systematic approach, I also assess meal timing and spacing, food combinations, hydration patterns. Most people don't drink enough water, supplement timing, and overall food quality. The key is identifying the root cause rather than treating symptoms. This systematic approach helps us create a sustainable solution for not only the off-season, but for all aspects of one's life. Is DHEA safe to use? Dehydroepiandrosterone, is it safe to use? So, a couple things to start with and preface. DHEA plays a crucial role in various psychological functions in the human body. It's synthesized from pregnenolone, which is derived from cholesterol. Once produced, DHEA can undergo further metabolic conversions into various hormones such as androstenedione, don't hold me to it, testosterone, and estrogens. DHEA is one of the most abundant circulating steroid hormones in the human body. It exerts anabolic effects, meaning it promotes tissue growth, protein synthesis, and development of lean body mass. Now, these effects can have positive impacts on the brain and body. However, to answer the question on whether it's safe or not to use, that's pending the circumstance. We want to consider looking at whether or not we have low or high levels of testosterone, estrogen, and the ever so important cortisol ratio. Now, the ratio of cortisol to DHEA is super important. When cortisol levels are elevated and DHEA levels are very low, it's safe to say that the individual is considered to be in a chronic stress response. So when it comes to supplementing with DHEA, it's not always the best idea. Reason being, DHEA can turn into both testosterone and estrogen, as I mentioned, but you can't control which one. Therefore, adding in DHEA into your body with unpredictable results could worsen the imbalance that could already be present and throw off other hormones' balance, causing unsurmountable issues down the road. Now, on the contrary to the cortisol levels being high that we just spoke on previously, in many cases, cortisol could be very low. And in this case, if you add in DHEA, it would actually drive cortisol even lower, which is not good. So though it wasn't asked, in this case, we may need to support total adrenal output, in which using something like adaptogens would make more sense. In the end, the most important thing to take away from this question is you must take a bigger look at the picture to determine whether or not DHEA supplementation is applicable and valuable for you. I currently take Hydraulic V2 and Intake pre-workout. Not sure what flavors you use, but I do have my recommendations if you care to know. With that said, the question says, how do I go about adding in creatine to this already superior stack? And the answer is, you just add it the fuck in. 5 grams is plenty to add in. You could take it first thing in the morning. You could take it pre-training. So personally, what I would recommend, if you're not training that day, take it first thing in the morning. Try not to forget. And if you are training, simply throw it right in along with those two. Why does Kyle never smile? I find it funny, and the reason being, as someone gets to know me out of the professional sense, they realize that I too am human. So yes, I experience emotions that can sometimes be comical, put me in a happy state, but at the end of the day, a lot of the experiences that people are going off of involve me in my work mode, and I take this shit really seriously. I really want to make a difference in every client's life that I work with, so I really try to prioritize not wasting anyone's time and doing the best I can do. So I really look at it like job's not finished until it is. And then it's not a facade that I have on, but it's easier for me to then kind of turn off the need to kind of provide the value that I would expect to be receiving if I was on the other end. So that's the reason perhaps some people might think I'm very serious, because this means a lot to me. I'm super passionate. I really want the most for every person. And my goal in life since I was a young adult not too long ago was to leave behind a legacy to where people were able to be taught something from me, and I added some type of value, because that's what matters more. The more people I can reach to help them with any aspect of their fitness, whether it be training, supplementation, nutrition, that is going to serve me a lifetime of happiness. How do you go about training your clients? Volume or intensity? So I think this is a fantastic question. And when it comes to training my clients, I employ a strategy that comprises both, to be honest. And it's tailored more so based on the specific needs of that individual, depending on what phase they're in, if they're in prep, an off-season, a maintenance, a health phase, things like that. Now, regardless of the phase that one is in, to me, the most important driver of progress is going to be intensity, not so much volume. And by intensity, I mean pushing close to or reaching muscular failure. I don't necessarily mean squat until you can't stand up, engage other muscle groups. That's not the goal. Though, I'll take that rather than the person that doesn't push themselves at all. But with intensity, I look at intensifiers within training being very helpful. Things like drop sets, rest pauses, just grinding out those last few sets if you have a badass training partner. That type of intensity is going to be a key driver in eliciting growth. In my experience, a client who consistently trains with high intensity, whether they're in a low or high volume regimen that they're following, the one that will always make better progress is the person that is training their balls off. And ladies, you might not have balls, but again, if you're training your ass off, that is what's going to matter more, okay? So intensity to me is about focus, effort, and the willingness to just push yourself to the furthest place that you can. That said, it's important to balance intensity with proper recovery and fatigue management. So in my cases, clients that I work with, I'm carefully monitoring their feedback on a weekly basis in their check-ins and things of that nature. And in listening to the client and what they're saying, I'll adjust their training based on the individual responses. There are some people that can train their balls off for 6 to 8 weeks at a time, while others can only push so hard for 4 weeks at a time. Knowing when to pull back is key to having as much linear growth as possible. So in summary, while I manipulate both volume and intensity depending on the client's goals and phase that they're in, intensity is the key constant that drives results across all aspects of one's programming. Will Kyle help Seth back to stage? So I would have to have a consultation with Seth to see if he fits the mold of my typical client. But jokes aside, time will tell. Is there anything I can do to help my appetite come back? I want to grow. Don't we all? Pretty common question, honestly, but without more specific information, all I can kind of do is give you a generalized answer. And to start with most people, I always say cardio is a powerful tool. A lot of people hear cardio and they think burning fat, but cardio is a great way to get one's metabolism in a better place and to also set the tone for your day. I can't tell you how many people do cardio maybe first thing in the morning and feel that they have more energy, more purpose for their day thereafter. And usually when you have someone not doing any type of cardio at all, and perhaps we put in some type of HIIT-based cardio, their hunger cues go through the roof and they're able to process the food. Now, another thing I would look at if you're having a hard time eating, as I touched on earlier, is identifying why. Is it the type of food you're choosing? Perhaps how you're comprising your meals, what the macro breakdown looks like, the quality of food you're using. All of these things play a crucial role. For those that are taking enhancements, PEDs, orals are generally very toxic. When your body is not hungry, that's telling you something. And in my humble opinion, everyone should always be hungry up until a certain point. Again, if you are an advanced bodybuilder, 250 plus pounds, someone intaking 5,000 calories day in and day out, yes, at some point your body's going to say enough is enough. I either need support digestively, as we touched on, or I need a bit of a break. That's very common. But most of the time when I get this question, it's from young adults that are either abusing PEDs, not paying attention to gut health and symptoms, and all they do is exacerbate the issue by starting to do stupid things such as blend their food, have crazy mass gainers, and just intake poor quality food. Another aspect to consider is how you approach setting up your diet. Is your food the same on training days versus off days? Me personally, I've always liked having my non-training days a bit lower in carbohydrates to preserve insulin sensitivity. Now, everyone is different. There are some people that can pound carbohydrates every single meal and never have any issues when they start to look at blood work. Those lab markers I specifically touched on, the A1C, fasted insulin, and things of that nature. While there are other people, depending on their body type, they can't get away with that. Once you start to have poor insulin sensitivity, you're not going to utilize your calories the same way. So just keep that in mind the next time you create your own diet. Can you list a set of questions that you wish male and female bodybuilders today would ask? Now, I don't know if this was meant to be questions directed toward me, so that's how I'm going to take it. If not, I do apologize. But questions I wish male and female bodybuilders today would ask in no specific order. I would say, what inhibited you the most in your career? What would I have done differently? What are my biggest regrets? How I would have approached nutrition differently at a younger age, and perhaps the impact that it had I not done so based on where I am today. What would be my approach to training? How do I avoid burnout? What does balance actually look like? And lastly, how can I prioritize my health? knowing that I want to be a bodybuilder and do the best and use PEDs, which at the end of the day aren't healthy any way you slice it. How can I incorporate them to expedite my progress without compromising my health and longevity in life? While on and off a cycle, how do I protect my heart and kidneys? Though I wish the answer was as simple as taking a few supplements, it's essential that someone is constantly monitoring and getting their lab work done. Your typical primary care physician, your PCP, is never going to prescribe the elaborate panel that I request my athletes to get. However, in our contemporary era, we have access to many different clinics and the ability to get those proper panels ran. And in doing so, we can not only preserve your overall quality of life, but we can be proactive rather than reactive, which is something I hold near and dear. Feel free to shoot me a message if you have any questions about specific markers that I would recommend testing for. What is the best and safest cycle to use after 5 years of natural lifting? So to clarify, knowing your age would be a bit more helpful because 5 years of training naturally at 14 isn't exactly qualifying you for any cycle in my opinion. With that said, assuming you meet the prerequisites, you have lab work, you follow a solid nutritional plan, and you have the finances to fund what is an expensive hobby to say the least, I would suggest just using testosterone as your first cycle at a low dose. And the reason for that, that's going to be your safest selection and generally your first cycle. You can make the most progress. Ask any, not real bodybuilder, but anyone that has ever taken a cycle. Usually their first one is always the best one. How much vitamin D3 do you recommend for athletes if they are in the lower end of the range? Now, an optimal range generally for vitamin D is 50 to 90 nanograms a milliliter. But let's start with what vitamin D is for those that may not understand. Vitamin D is taken in through either sunlight or via supplementation and nutrition. It's something that is super important to every cell and tissue throughout the human body. From proper immune function and bone density to heart health and mood disorders, vitamin D is critical for optimal health. Vitamin D facilitates the absorption of many micronutrients. To name a few, you have magnesium, calcium, iron, zinc, and selenium. It also increases the uptake of harmful toxins and metals such as lead, arsenic, aluminum. Because these micronutrients compete through the same pathway, it's important to ensure adequate intake of the vital micronutrients and decrease our exposure to the harmful toxins that we can intake. Because these micronutrients compete through the same pathway, it's super important to ensure we're getting adequate vital micronutrients and limiting our exposure to the harmful metals, as we don't want to overcrowd the good with the bad. Now, getting back to the question, lower and inadequate levels of vitamin D are actually quite common. A low level estimate would be about 25% of the population are not getting in proper amounts of vitamin D. As I touched on, sunlight exposure coupled with nutrition or supplementation is generally how one is going to intake vitamin D to begin with. Now, some research suggests that the low levels of vitamin D are potentially associated, not a direct cause, rather a byproduct of certain diseases and dysfunction in the human body, and the risks for certain cancers, inflammation, dysfunction, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease are more so the reasons for the low vitamin D to begin with. Now, if an individual is supplementing with vitamin D and lab work is still showing that levels are low, that may indicate that there's a condition preventing the supplement from being absorbed in the intestines. So we'd be considering things like IBD, gut dysbiosis, celiac diseases, just to name a few. Now, my recommended dose for vitamin D starting off would be 125 micrograms, also known as 5,000 IU. Lucky for you, this exact dose is already in one of our fantastic health products that we offer, Heart Plus. Now, to continue the conversation past the initial question, high levels of vitamin D are generally due to excess supplementation. However, as I touched on earlier, too much can become toxic, so please be mindful of just aimlessly taking ample amount of vitamin D in your daily regimen. What is a key tip for working a muscle the right way during any workout? So my motto has always been train muscles, not movements. And what I mean by that is ensuring that the movement and patterns you are choosing are in turn, the best movements for you. So depending on your limb length, limitations, perhaps you have a prior injury, or perhaps your mind-muscle connection isn't allowing you to get the most out of the movement. It's super important to pay attention to those factors. You may love to deadlift or squat. However, if you're constantly using poor form, or you get to an advanced point where the amount of weight you need starts to possess a bigger risk than is necessary in terms of bodybuilding, that's when oftentimes I'll recommend switching to other movement patterns. Why did you stop pursuing bodybuilding? Unfortunately, for those that don't know, I had 2 major injuries within 8 months of one another, a ruptured left quad and a ruptured right tricep that put a damper on my ability to progress, to say the least. It's been about 1.5 years since, and I am feeling very good and growing once again, so who knows what the future holds. Aside from that, the reality is I get a unmeasurable amount of happiness, surprisingly, out of helping others. So my clients always are going to be a priority to me, more so than my own personal journey when it comes to competing. The last thing I ever want to do is to make someone feel as though I prioritize my own bodybuilding prep over what could be their career. How long should a fat loss plan be, and what is the ideal rate of fat loss for a weekly basis? So fantastic question here, and a common mistake that I see a lot of people fall victim to. Far too often people are in significant cutting phases for more than 6 months of a year, which is just kind of crazy, to be honest. What people forget, there is technically 3 phases: bulking, cutting, and the forgotten maintenance phase. Interchanging from a significant cutting phase into an immediate bulking phase is a recipe for a disaster. All of that work you put into getting lean, going to an extreme bulk, is just going to start to accumulate into more fat than is necessary being accrued rather than what's desired, that being muscle tissue. Likewise, transitioning from peak bulk to an extreme cutting phase, you're going to let go of the muscle you just spent time, perhaps force feeding, to attribute muscle being gained. The last thing you want to do is forget that maintenance phase. Super important and vital for success when it comes to building muscle. What is one piece of advice you wish aspiring bodybuilders would listen to? Love this question, and my answer is pretty simple. A little goes a long way, and I mean that in all aspects, from your food intake to your PED usage. Be patient. Rushing the process is not going to do anything but ruin the physique that you're ultimately trying to craft. Life is extremely short. Please, don't try to make it shorter. When you're sick in prep, what is most important? So I think this question is very helpful. Now, it specifies being in prep. The answer somewhat would change. I'd say in the off season, generally always prioritize getting healthy immediately. Don't spend time, especially when your body's looking to put on muscle. It needs the recovery, as I touched on earlier. So don't compromise those recovery capabilities further by creating more of an acute stressor by going to the gym. Likewise, in prep, you have to factor in and consider allostatic load, which is already higher, being that you're in a deficit. Perhaps you're using PEDs, your body's leaner. All of these things play a vital role. Now, if someone was in prep, I would consider how close they are to the show. If they're behind schedule, what that looks like. In an ideal scenario, I generally try to have people ahead of schedule. I can take 2 or 3 days, have the client take off, stay on top of their hydration and electrolytes, and simply just rest, follow a rest day diet, or perhaps we'll make some changes to the diet as needed. And again, I won't have them actually training or doing any type of cardio. Now, depending if the person's behind or if they're maybe 2 weeks out, I might remove training and just have them do some type of cardio, or in some cases, depending on how sick the person is, again, if we're talking 90% a little stuffy nose versus, hey, I have the norovirus and I'm ass blasting, there's quite a difference there, all right? What is coming next from Axe and Sledge? So we're gonna be dropping a lot of new products and products that can be a part of anyone's daily regimen that I would truly recommend, and I'll speak at length on when those products come out. In addition to that, we have some favorite products people like using, such as our protein, pre-workouts that we're going to be having new tasty flavors debuting soon.